Fiona. Hope you're well. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm sure we have all met, but if I haven't met you all, can I wish you all a happy new year? Little late, but still. It's only halfway through January. Welcome on a rather wet and perhaps breezy evening, following a wet and very breezy site visit on Monday. By way of introductions then, firstly, can we please make sure that our mobile phones, including members of the public out there, our mobile phones are switched either off or to silent. There is no plan for a fire alarm service test this evening, so should you hear a continuously ringing bell, let's hot-foot it out through the green marked exits, there and there, and gather underneath the canopy outside Waitrose. And we are being webcast members, so please do make sure your cards are plugged in and please use the microphone. Moving on then, let me first introduce our officers around the table here. Erica Scarlett, our legal whiz. Elizabeth Sims, Development Control Manager. Barry Lomax there, our team leader for East and Central, and a new face that you may not have seen before, but you will see very regularly in future, I expect, as Peter Cleveland, our new Principal Planning Officer. Welcome, Peter. Up on the podium here, to my right, is Fiona Cameron, our Committee Secretary. On my left, your Vice Chairman, Jenny Else. Moving on to the agenda then, item 1, the minutes. They've been on the table for the last 30 minutes or so of our meeting held on the 3rd of December. Is it your wish that I sign them as a correct record? Thank you very much. Apologies for absence, please, Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Diane James and Brett Borley.
Very much. Disclosure of interests.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had a disclosure from Councillor Forojewski in relation to item B1, as she is a friend of a resident who is a close neighbour of the application site.
Thank you very much. Any further disclosures at all? No? Let's move on. Item 4, questions?
None, Chairman.
Okay. Item 5. Elizabeth, any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting?
No, Chairman. Thank you very much.
And finally, we get to item 6, applications for planning permission. As I mentioned, we did have a site inspection on Monday. We wandered around up on a windswept hillside in Willinghurst. Thank you to the local member for inviting us along. So we don't have any public speaking. So that is item B1, WO 2014/0770, alterations to an existing barn to provide a dwelling with integrated garage at Spring House, Willinghurst Estate, Shamley Green, as amended by plans received on the 6th of October 2014. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as the Chairman said, we're looking at an application for alterations to the existing barn to provide a new dwelling with integrated garage. Here we have a location plan. Members who came on the site visit will be familiar with the site. This is off the Willinghurst Estate Road, in close proximity, or reasonably close proximity, to Shamley Green village. Here we have some photographs of the barn in question. Here we have the northern elevation. You'll see the barn is a concrete portal barn, the breeze block plinth wall with corrugated steel cladding and asbestos roofing. Here we have the eastern elevation, western elevation, and view across the southern elevation of the site into this lean-to area with a lorry type pit here for working on, and views from the other direction into the southern elevation. Here we have the existing floor plan. This plan also shows the structural elements, the concrete portal stanchion columns, and here we have the, yes, you can see it better than I can see it on my screen, the existing elevations. Now take you on to the proposed floor plans. It is a reuse of the building as opposed to a rebuild, although it is acknowledged there would be a fair amount of materials brought on to make this building into a habitable accommodation. The application also includes this small extension here I'm indicating on your screen, as a changing facilities for the pool house it neighbours. This area, I'm indicating on your screen now, is currently covered over but will be opened up as part of the application. Here we have the proposed elevations. The height and width of the building and length will all stay the same, but it will be reclad, or would be reclad, in different materials than what's there now. It would be a mixture of render, timber cladding, a brick plinth wall and slate roofs. On the southern elevation you'll notice there is some fenestration, or a fair amount of fenestration being punctured through the existing cladding. If I now take you on to the determining issues, on our left we have matters of principal technical judgment, on our right matters of judgment. Starting with greenbelt considerations, paragraph 90 of the framework tells us that we can reuse buildings in the greenbelt and there need not be, or it need not be, inappropriate development. Going on to location of development, paragraph 55 of the framework tells us that we shouldn't be allowing isolated dwellings in the countryside unless there are some special circumstances. One of the special circumstances listed in the framework is the reuse of a building and a reuse that would lead to the improvement of the immediate landscape. Officers consider that this proposal would achieve those aims. Now on to the highway considerations. The Highways Authority have looked at the proposal and don't raise any objection on highway safety or capacity. However, they do have, or they do raise some concerns about the sustainability of the location. Now, whilst it's very kind of the Highways Authority to share their wise words with this regard, this is a matter really for the decision makers, yourselves, and we would direct that certainly paragraph 28 of the framework identifies that sustainable transport, which is what the Transport Authority or Highways Authority's issue is, sustainable transport varies from urban to rural areas and isn't the same. Now, whilst this site is not tremendously well served by public transport, there is a bus stop at the end of Willinghurst Estate Road which does offer maybe an infrequent service into the local village and further beyond, but it is there nonetheless. So we would say that this is a sustainable location in terms of its rural sustainability, and notwithstanding the reuse of a building has sustainability credentials in and of itself. Now moving on to matters of judgment, design and impact on visual amenity. The application site is located in an area of outstanding natural beauty, and members will know, which will come on to landscape considerations at the bottom of the screen, but Section 85 of the Countryside Rights of Way Act places an obligation on local authorities to discharge its functions in an AONB with the overriding aim of preserving and enhancing the natural environment. Now, officers consider that through the use of sympathetic materials, the timber cladding, the slate roof, that this proposal would achieve those aims. When we were on site, a number of members raised concern with the fenestration on the southern elevation. Now, I have a revised condition that would seek details of the treatment of that fenestration so as to minimise light spillage, be that through the addition of a film over the windows or to have tinted glass. We are confident through discussions with the architect that a solution can be arrived at that would minimise light spillage on that southern elevation. Impact on residential amenity, neighbouring properties, that there are some scattered around, but none so close so as to be overlooked or interfered with by this property. There is a property to the east, a relatively new build that we saw on site. Again, I don't think that's so close so as to cause any harm. Landscape considerations we've covered, and with regards to amenity space, I think we'll see we saw on site there's sufficient amenity space around the proposal so as to meet the needs of future occupiers. On screen now I have a couple of updates. I have a revised or a new condition 13 which would deal with the treatment of the fenestration so as to minimise light spillage, to be submitted and approved by the local planning authority. And then I have an informative number 7 which picks up on some of the concerns raised by members in relation to asbestos on site. And number 7 just highlights the obligations of any developer in line with Regulation 4 of the Asbestos Regulations 2012. Then we have the revised recommendation, and that is that permission be granted subject to the planning conditions on pages 26 to 29 of the agenda, the informative on page 29 of the agenda, and planning condition number 13 and informative number 7 on the update screen, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. Mr. Band?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you also, officers, for organising the site visit, which I think was, from my perspective, was quite helpful. I hope others did as well. One of the points you didn't mention, and I just want to comment before I comment further, is that, as I understand it, one of the other special circumstances to allow reuse of a barn like this, not an ancient barn, would be the fact that it can be reused without substantial reconstruction. Is that my understanding correct?
That's correct. So policy RD7 of the local plan and the framework would only allow a reuse, not a rebuild.
Right, thank you. Well, I think, as we all saw, this is a large barn, and if we were permit this development, it would be a large dwelling, and I can certainly understand the parish council's concerns, which they raised with you. My concern really is one of my principal concerns is the amount of reconstruction that is actually going to be required to make this realistically a habitable dwelling designed to modern standards. I think the applicant already acknowledges the cladding will all come off, so it's got to be reclad. As I understand it, a substantial amount of the block work will have to be removed in any case. Some of it is not in a very good condition, some of it's in the wrong place, and on that northeast corner, north and northeast corner, quite a lot of it is currently below ground level, and I would imagine to make the building truly habitable, that you would want to take that back and make sure it's properly waterproof. So we're going to be left substantially just with the portal frames, I would guess. And my real question then is, if we're going to have a new roof, which is going to be now tiled with slate and no doubt have insulation panels and glazing in it, we're going to get substantial extra weight going to be involved. And I just really question, from an engineering perspective, whether the existing portal structure can really carry a roof like that without substantial reconstruction, without substantial additional reinforcing in there. So there's not enough detail in the application, either in the report or the submissions by the applicant, to actually really go into that sort of level of detail. And it does seem to me that if we were to consider granting approval, we would need to seek assurance in some more detail that there wasn't going to be a wholesale reconstruction of this building. But all is left really is the portal frame, but almost a new structure inside required for not only for the mezzanine floor, which I think we acknowledge, but also to support the external structure. And how we do that, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know what other members, how they would comment. I mean, do we defer it till we see? Do we call for some more information? Do we defer it? Or do we grant approval conditionally on more information coming available to make a proper assessment, a more detailed assessment, or a proper assessment, as to whether there really is reconstruction or substantial reconstruction to the extent that it is in effect a rebuild of a building but with the same shape? Anyway, I'd be interested to see what others comment before I comment further.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just come to that second point first, Councillor Band. This, of course, isn't a new concern in respect of these proposals for reuse of buildings in the countryside. It's one that we've been grappling with over a long period of time. And, of course, RD7 has been with us in the local plan since 2002. There was a predecessor policy which required a similar test. In the event of that test being relevant, we do always require a structural survey to assist with the application. Barry will speak further about some of the detail in that report. But we have to take into account expert opinion in these matters. And to that extent, we have relied on their assurances that they believe it is substantial, they are experts, and they can carry it out without reconstruction. I suppose the catch-all is that if permission is granted, it's on the basis that it will be a reuse and that you're satisfied from their submissions that it won't be a rebuild. What we've done over the years, you may recall, is to perhaps add an informative as a precautionary measure to remind the applicant that in the event of them needing to demolish or be tempting to demolish, that they would need planning permission to rebuild the building. So it's a headline for them on the planning permission that in the event of them deciding, well, actually, we're going to have to take this down, that will wipe out the effect of the planning permission and means they have to start again with an application to rebuild it. And that has been effective, I believe, in the past in reassuring applicants that that's all they've got permission for. I don't think Barry wants to add anything about the substance of the structural report to that.
Thank you. So looking at the conclusions of the structural survey, the engineer, the engineering company Cooper and Withercombe conclude that the building is capable of being converted for the proposed use without the need for rebuilding. Now, I share some of your concerns as well. If we were going back in time before the National Planning Policy Framework, these certainly aren't the type of buildings which would be looking at allowing the change of use. But the framework has taken away what maybe previous planning policy had about buildings being worthy of retention. That has now dropped away, and we're really just looking at any building in the countryside, as long as it's of a permanent and substantial construction and doesn't need rebuilding, would meet with those policy tests.
Thank you for letting me come back. I mean, I've looked at the structural report in some detail, but it makes assertions, but actually doesn't provide any evidence to support those assertions. And if you actually look at parts of it and reviewing the current proposals, and I quote, it talks about, for example, the design classification of the building intended for a different surface life. And whilst these criteria may have been less than required under current design standards for residential buildings, proposed alterations and additions to the building and additions to the building structure will ensure a robust building. So it seems to be totally dependent on the additions to the structure for them making that report. And without the detail of those additions, it seems to me, I find it very difficult to judge or make a judgment as to whether those are so substantial that we should be considering refusing or otherwise. Yeah, I know they've made their overall statement, but it does seem to me conditioned to the fact that it does require additional structure to make it a sound structure. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear what others have to say.
I wonder if I might ask the officers. I would have thought the structural soundness of this barn as it stands and its suitability for conversion into a residential dwelling perhaps would rest with building control as opposed to development control. Barry?
Certainly going forward, the building control, if they use our team here, our building control officers, or they may use private control officers, they would certainly need to be sure that if moving forward, or going forward rather, the building is sound and of substantial construction, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gates.
Yes, thank you. I mean, this issue of rebuild or not is an interesting debate. There's certain semantics, I'm sure, involved. You're putting a new roof on. Is that rebuilding it? I think I'd approach this from the other end of this. What is going to be the net external result of this? And I don't believe even if you did have to put a couple of RSJs inside to have the roof up or whatever, that's actually going to change what is outside. And for me, I don't think we should strain too hard to find reasons to turn down a new home. I don't think it's very beautiful now. I think it will be significantly improved when we have the new development. I think the reassurance that Elizabeth has given us that indeed there are, if not conditions, requirements to prove that it is not a complete rebuild would reassure me that that actually couldn't happen. And therefore I'm inclined to agree with the officers. I mean, there are balances here, obviously, but at the moment it doesn't exactly enhance the AONB. So my view is this would be an improvement, and it would also result in a home, and homes are good. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the bottom of page 15, where it says that paragraph 90 of the National Planning Policy Framework confirms that the reuse of existing buildings, provided that the buildings are of permanent of substantial construction. Well, it strikes me that this is far from being a permanent and substantial construction. When I saw it, it was just a rectangle of breeze blocks with corrugated asbestos roofing. It was very far. I mean, I could have built it myself. I don't think this is particularly substantial, and I would have thought there's a very good reason to turn this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. I think you might have had trouble moving those concrete stanchions around, but still, let's not go there. Mr. Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just come back to my colleague's comments on the left here, I think with what you see, you've got an asbestos-covered building there. It's cracked, it's blown in the breeze, and I think we ought to grasp with both hands an opportunity to get rid of that. And we never know where those asbestos bits are going, so that's all going to be gone. It's not going to cost anyone anything apart from the redevelopment, and I think it's a great idea to do that. And if I can just come back with what Mr. Holder was saying, he must have muscles that I don't know, haven't seen, but the portal frame on that, when that was erected, is done on a freestanding foundation, which would have been inspected by our own building control and would have been on suitable grounds. And in my opinion, the frame of that building is probably 80% of the strength of it, if not 90%, and it is fine. And I think we should grasp this opportunity with both hands to get rid of the asbestos, create a nice home, and I think the officer's report was good, and it shows an encouraging sign to me to move on and create more homes. I think we should vote it through. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the site was very helpful, as we could see this building in the context that it is. I do take the view, having looked at the building, that it is, in my view, permanent as substantial construction. It seemed to me the breeze block and the frame look very substantial to me, and well built. It's only the bit on the southern side where it's on the right of that photograph, where you can see the brickwork on the yes, and I think the other end of that bit is actually which is going to be taken down, I assume anyway. The main bit is all right, but when it starts going down the slope, it I think has come away and is showing cracks. But apart from that, I think all the block work looks, to me as a layman, pretty substantial. I'm also, mention was made that if they were going to do a sort of rebuild and knock down what's there, if they were thinking of doing that once they'd started, that we should have an informative. And unless I missed it, I can't see on the 6 informatives and the 7th that's to be added that there's any reference to an informative that if they need to reconstruct this building, then they need to get planning permission to do so. And it does seem to me that an informative to that effect would be helpful to reassure us all that this isn't a planning application saying we're going to keep it, and then they say, oh, what a shame. We think it's all going to fall down, so we better pull it all down and build it. It'll look the same, but actually it'll be a rebuild. So I think we need to cover that. And the other thing that was the fenestration, I'm happy with the extra condition, or yes, the extra condition. And I was very much sharing the sort of concern that was expressed till I looked at the place next door, and which I think is Spring Cottage, which, as we said, is modern, and is practically plate glass everywhere on the back of that one. So either we thought it was all right then for that one when they sought planning permission, or I don't know what, but I still think it's a good idea to put it in, but I'm less concerned about it. I mean, it's not facing any other buildings that can be seen from in the southern elevation or the southern aspect, but it's still going to produce a spillage of light into a very rural scene. I think with the extra informative to reassure us that the building is going to remain substantially as it is, I'm content with it, bearing in mind the rules of the game now are such that permission should be granted if it's going to be substantially used in a modern barn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Byron?
Yes, Chairman, I go along with the view that anything would be an improvement in terms of what it looks like. It's not an attractive building. Equally, it's not a horribly dilapidated building. It could be continue to be used for farm use if that was their wish. And indeed, as part of that, the breeze blocks that we talk about, that Mr. Holder's going to rebuild quite easily or build in the first place, could be knocked down by, I believe, without planning permission, to gain different accesses or whatever in a farm use. Because we're changing from farm use to a habitable space, then different rules apply, and clearly that's the reason we're here this evening. So I think overall, that's right. We have a history of something like that in a much smaller building in Bramley, and there the roof did collapse. In this case, looking at that, I don't see that that's likely to be the case at all. It looks substantial and in reasonable condition, and could be used and would improve the countryside generally. And if it's never ever going to be used for farm use or whatever, land use again, then it's only going to get worse in terms of its visual state and its usability, and therefore I'm minded to agree with the officers, but with the right conditions as have been suggested by colleagues.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Ellis?
Thank you, Chairman. I have to, in this case, agree with the officer's recommendation. There were a number of issues that, when I read the report, I was quite shocked at the report from the highways officers when we consider their reasons for objecting to this and then look at their non-objection to Amlet's Lane, and I apologise, I can't possibly allow this opportunity to pass without raising that for your attention. But there are so many things I think that could be negative about the application, but when we look at it, in the end, the barn, it can't support agriculture. It's in a very, very small plot. It's not part of farmland, so I don't see that it could come into use again as supporting an agricultural use. I think really my colleagues have actually raised most of the issues that I wanted to, but there's no increase in the number of vehicles that will be using this particular area. I don't particularly like the design of the elevations, but I suspect really that the applicants are being forced into using the existing building, which I think is perhaps an unexpected consequence of a policy, has forced that. But I think on balance, I agree with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ellis. You stole my thunder there, because I had been hoping to home in on that paragraph from the County Highway Authority. I find it quite intriguing, really. Here we are considering the erection or conversion of a barn into a 5-bedroomed residential dwelling complete with swimming pool, and the County Highway Authority think that they would probably very likely walk all the way down there and try and find a bus on the Guildford Road. Would that they had have come up with this one, or this recommendation, as regards to Amlet's Lane. We weren't then looking at one 5-bedroom property. We were looking at 125, but the voice of the highways remained silent. And frankly, I think it is disgraceful. But sorry about that, Bleat. Mr. Band.
Thank you. for letting me come back. I mean, I think with the concept of a further informative on the issue of rebuild, I would be content with that. And I mean, I agree with much of what the other councillors have said about the value of doing the work, and particularly tidying it up, and also the advantage of safely getting rid of all the cement asbestos which is there, which I think is something really worthwhile. There's one other possible condition which I think might be able to consider, and is actually offered by the applicant on sustainability. In the applicant's application, they did actually suggest we might want to include a clause of approving the sustainability measures. I think it's paragraph 619 of the design and access statement. And it seems to me we should be taking advantage of the applicant's offer to include such a clause, that the sustainability issues are therefore review and approval by the council. But apart from that, I would then be, if that could be included, I would then be content to support the application.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on that latter point, I think it could be justified to include such a condition in this instance, because although you'll see from reports now, there isn't currently a policy requirement on us to require sustainability credentials on residential development at the current time. But in this instance, if you felt it was justified, you could justify it on the basis that the benefit of those measures would outweigh any harm that you'd identified in terms of any impact upon the landscape, and therefore there could be a justification for that condition.
And it has been offered by the applicant specifically. It seems to me it's an offer we should willingly accept.
Okay, we'll come back to conditions in a minute. Mr. Gates, you wanted to come back.
Thank you for letting me come back. I just thought it ought to be placed on record, to be fair to the Highways Authority. There are actually more than one bit of the Highways Authority. There's the bit that looks at the general principle of development and which is, generally speaking, not in favour of building in the middle of nowhere. And there's the other bit, paragraph 2, which looks at the issue of highway safety. Now, if you take Amlet Lane, I don't even say it's in the middle of nowhere, so on that issue they may have been silent, but they gave their professional opinion on highway safety. But that's a different issue from the one that they are talking about in paragraph 1 here. I hope I'm right, officers, that there are two bits of the highways, probably more than two bits, but in this instance there's a policy bit and a highway safety bit, and these are quite separate.
Thank you very much for that correction, Mr. Gates, but I'm sure really you will understand that in this particular instance I'm not minded to apologise for what I said, and I rather think that Mrs. Ellis isn't either. Members, before we go to the officer's recommendation, there have been suggestions for a number of additional conditions. Mr. Band, I don't know whether or not you want to put words to your proposals, or whether you're relying on our officers to do it for you.
Well, it is actually in the applicant's document. I mean, I haven't actually got a hard copy with me to read it out, but there is actually a clause, I think it's paragraph 619, where he makes a specific offer with some wording, and I would be quite content with that. If Barry's got it in front of him, he may like to read it out, or if he's happy with it.
Thank you. The condition reads as follows. No development shall take place until details of a scheme of measures to reduce the energy consumption of the building and to implement renewable energy techniques have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The development should be carried out in direct accordance with the approved details.
Members agree to a condition in that respect being added? Yes? Elizabeth.
Chairman, then if I could just suggest a wording around the informative. The applicant is advised that the permission hereby granted is strictly upon the basis of the approved plans stroke details as a reuse of the existing building. Redevelopment or complete demolition of this building would require a new planning permission. Thank you.
Mr. Goodrich.
One word I don't like is complete. Yes. I would prefer substantial or something of that nature. They've only got to leave about 6 foot by 4 foot of breeze blocks, and they'll say, well, we've left that bit and we're just going to rebuild the rest. So I think substantial, or some word like that, which I think substantial is better than complete.
So with substantial rather than complete, changed in, Elizabeth suggested informative. Are we happy with that one as well? Sorry, I believe that we are already comfortable with the additional condition 13, minimising light spillage on the southern elevation, and also informative 7 regarding asbestos. So with those additional conditions and informatives, can I see those members in favour of the officer's recommendation, please? Those against? Abstentions? 1 abstention. Permission then, with all those additional conditions and informatives, is granted. And I think that's all we have actually, members. Before we actually disperse, could I perhaps ask, you will have noticed that Flo Taylor was the planning officer dealing with this. Could I ask if there's any news?
There is, Chairman. Glad to announce that Flo Taylor had a little baby boy yesterday. So she actually left to go for the weekend and then never came back to be sent off on maternity leave. So she's but good news, thank you.
Thank you very much then, ladies and gentlemen. Have a safe journey home.